Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. Hosted by Stuart Armstrong, an experienced talent development specialist and coach, the Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. Always honest, sometimes controversial, never dull. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. I'm a little bit beside myself with excitement today because I've got Doug Lemov from Uncommon Schools on the podcast. It's a big day for the Talent Equation podcast in the early days of our little journey here. So, Doug, delighted to have you on.
Thanks, Stuart. Really glad to be with you.
Great stuff. So just to sort of, I guess, to set the scene a little bit, I stumbled across, and I really can't remember how, but I stumbled across Teach Like a Champion. Was that your first book?
It was.
I stumbled across it, I think, 2010. Wow, yeah. So that's going back a little bit. I stumbled across it, and a few of the videos I think I saw on YouTube. Then I came to the Uncommon Schools website. Then immediately I bought the book. Have it in front of me. It's very dog-eared and well thumbed through, and it became a bit of a manual for me in my coaching journey. I saw so many of the techniques within it that were really valuable, and subsequently many of the other things that you've done. That I've been following kind of the journey for a long time. So I know you well, but maybe not everybody else will be able to will know of you as well. So I wonder if you could just kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody a bit about the experience you've been on with Uncommon Schools.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thanks for having me on. It's a great opportunity. So I used to be a teacher and then a school principal, and I worked in the charter school sector in the U.S., which is primarily urban schools for kids in the inner city who are often cut off from opportunity. They don't have good schools to go to. In a lot of American cities, 3% of kids go on to university from the most deprived neighborhoods. And so with a group of other people, we set out to start great schools that change the equation of opportunity in those neighborhoods. And, our last group of high school graduates, everyone went to college. So that's what we set out to do. But we found out really quickly, that a dream wasn't the dream of helping students achieve more was not sufficient. And our teachers came back to us and they said, this is really, really hard. And the advice that we got in graduate school, the advice you get in books, it doesn't help us solve the problems that we're facing in the classroom. So it was your idea to start this school, help us get better. And so I was recovering from an MBA at the time. And that's thanks, I feel better. I've been used to thinking about data to solve problems. And so I ran a series of scatter plots where I took the percentage of kids living in poverty in any school and put it on the x-axis. And then I took student achievement by the best measures that we had in the U.S. on the y-axis. And I ran a mini regression. And what it revealed was an overwhelming correlation between poverty and low achievement. And you could quantify the degree to which every additional percentage of kids of poverty in any school reduced the likelihood of student success. But what it also revealed were positive outliers, which is there were people every day who achieved incredible things, who, even though they had kids of poverty and kids who others said, oh, those kids will never learn, they did learn in their classes and they did incredible things. And so I decided to set out and find as many of those teachers as I could and study them so I could use their I could derive guidance for our teachers based on what the champions of the teaching profession did. So I started sneaking into their classrooms. And as soon as I started going, I was just blown away. What they did was incredible. It was not only incredible and inspirational. You know what it feels like to be held in the sway of a great teacher. But I was also struck by sometimes the things that they did were what you were supposed to do, and sometimes the things that they did were what you were not supposed to do, but it worked. And so then I had this idea of I have to bring my video camera with me because no one's going to believe how great this is. So I started videotaping these teachers, and ultimately this became my first book, Teach Like a Champion, which was what do positive outliers do that makes them different from the merely good? What makes the great different from the merely good? I tried to describe it in what was then 49 techniques. And then I was at this point running a network of schools, but I started doing teacher training, and there was a lot of demand for teacher training. It turns out that people were really hungry for solutions to teaching problems, and they were basically thrown into really challenging classrooms without sufficient solutions. And so there was a clamor for ideas, and really quickly I found that great teachers would take the ideas and they would do brilliant things with them that I hadn't even thought about. So very quickly I had to rewrite Teach Like a Champion into Teach Like a Champion 2.0, which is sort of the second round revised version. And at least that's how I got started. Maybe that's good. Maybe I'll pause there.
Well, one question I've always wanted to ask you actually is, I kind of just assumed that when teachers go through teacher training, that they kind of get given these techniques. But from what you tell, what the story you tell, it's almost like most of the teachers sort of develop or evolve these techniques through being on the job. Mm-hmm. And you've harnessed those. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I'd say that, and it might even be worse than that. I mean, certainly I think it's emphatically true that most teacher education programs do not teach these things. And in some cases would not stoop to teach them because they think that they're unworthy. I mean, to me, the task of teaching someone is so, without argument, the most worthy task that we take in society, the transmission of knowledge, the transmission of opportunity, that it needs no apologies. And if we can talk about the craft of how you make that classroom more efficient or ask your questions better or motivate students more, it doesn't need any apology. We should just talk about how to do that because it's so valuable. But I think there's a little bit of apology for teaching out there. It's kind of perverse, which is, sometimes teachers say, I'm just a teacher. Well, why just? But I think that's sort of written into the fabric of graduate schools, where there's a lot of reading of Paulo Freire and, what is pedagogy? Should the classroom be democratic? Sort of high level philosophical treatises, when to me it's a craft. And I'm much more interested in the moves that make you able to have a very successful math lesson than a theory of the degree to which the classroom should be, X, Y, or Z. So, but I think graduate schools tend to be more full of philosophy and less full of pragmatics. One of the things that I wrote about in the book, maybe known for it, and in some cases known for it in a negative way, is just talking about efficiency in the classroom, how you use your minutes. So there's a video that I show of a teacher, the first day of class, a very high-performing teacher teaching his kids to pass out papers. And so they do it in 12 seconds. They pass the papers down the row, and he says, pretty good, back in 10. And the kids set papers back in 10. And he says, that's even better. See if you can do it back out in 8. And so some people watch this video with outrage, and they think, how can he be training them to be robots and things like that? Teaching is about ideas. To which I would say, yes, exactly. And if he can do this a minute faster than another teacher with less, the disorder of distributing or collecting materials in a lot of classrooms is noteworthy. Well, you do that 10 times a day and you save a minute every day. Over the course of a school year, it works out to 7.5 days of instruction. So, it's almost a moral imperative to do this. And yet I would say there's not a graduate school of education in this country that would stoop to teach its teachers how to teach their stoop to teach its teachers to teach their students how to pass out papers and have these routines that make for efficiency. And I would say that's, I assume we're going to talk a little bit about coaching and people development. One of the part of the journey since writing that book has been thinking about teaching in other settings. And I think it's one of the overlaps between teaching and coaching, which is efficiency really matters, not only because you use your time better, but because you eliminate the distractions that cause people to lose focus on the tasks they're trying to learn.
Yeah, one of the, where the overlap for me is, I've thought about my own journey, if you like, as a coach. And when I came across Teach Like a Champion, I basically thought of it as Coach Like a Champion, because immediately for me, I was like, well, where were these techniques in my coach education journey? This would have made things a whole lot easier. My favorite by a mile is cold call. It's just one that's just I don't know why. It's just one that really stuck with me. Yeah. But what's interesting is I've discovered, since I do a lot of coach development and coach education myself, and when I talk to coaches about cold call, they kind of sniff a little bit, but also they quite often raise objections like, well, I don't want to put people on the spot, and and I don't want to. And I said, well, yeah, but there's a skill to it, because then I use is it no opt out? Yeah, no opt out. Yeah. Where you come back, don't you? You come back to the individual if they're struggling. You don't put them on the spot forever.
Right.
You come back to them, and it's just so enormously powerful in terms of the level of engagement you get from people.
I think it's really true, especially when it becomes, when it's positive and students understand that you want them to be successful, and maybe like you smile when you cold call and you say, depending on the sport, pause. What situation do we have here? Jason, we've got 3 players compact in front of us. Great. And so Carl, what do I need? Where do I want to go with this ball? Right. Where do I want to play this ball? I want to play this ball wide, right? That, like, if I make it a real conversation, maybe I smile at them when I ask them the question, I say, very good, excellent, right? This is going to translate onto the field. I'm a little bit encouraging. Then I think I can make it a positive, engaging experience. I think one of the most hidden things about cold call is how inclusive it is. I remember being a student so many times where I had things that I wanted to say in the classroom, but I would never have raised my hand for 1,000 reasons. Maybe I was worried about talking too much, or more likely, maybe I was worried about I look foolish if I get it wrong. I half think that I have it right. That's a great moment for a student to participate when they think they have it, but they're not sure enough to raise their hand. Or maybe I was worried that people would think I was nerdy if I answered it. And so half the time students want to be called on in a strange way. And for a teacher to look at them and say, what do you think, Stuart? What would you do here, Stuart? Is not, to me, demeaning of it. It's one of the most respectful things you get. It says to a student, I care what you think, and I want to know what's on your mind right now. But I also think that notion that like, why would I want to put someone on the spot? To perform is to be put on the spot. Right? I don't want to put my center midfielder on the spot. One of the things he needs to be successful, if I'm going to prepare him to be, he needs to be able to think quickly. And so I need to be able to pause and say, great, what do you observe about the situation? David, I'm playing into a numbers down situation. Yes, exactly. And so what do we need to do? Right? That sort of fast recall, not waiting for kids to raise their hand or letting, if David has the ball and he's under pressure, he doesn't have the choice to say, I think I'll raise my hand now or not. He has to learn to be able to think quickly on his feet. And I think that's one thing that cold call can also do for coaches that's incredibly powerful. Questioning is such an important tool for coaches, but it can also be very inefficient if it's not done well.
Well, you just actually touched on something with the question you actually asked, which I think is really important. So somebody said to me on a session, a coach development workshop I was running not long ago, that they said their kids get question fatigue.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I I probed a bit more, and then they and what I discovered was they were basically playing what I describe as the coach guessing game.
Yes.
So it's like, I'm thinking of something. This is the correct answer. I'm going to ask you a question. Yeah. And the kids get pretty wise to that, don't they? And they just don't want to play the game anymore. But the question you asked, which is really different, is what do you notice?
Yeah, so a couple things about questioning that at least I've been thinking about recently. One is, how do you make questioning engaging and useful and high value for students, whether they're in the classroom or on the playing field? And 2 things jump to mind. One is I want to make the pace fast. One, because fast recall is generally important. in the playing field, and 2, because it's just more engaging for students. So if I had a question, I might, typically I might ask a student a question in the classroom. What were the three primary causes of the American Civil War, Stuart? And then we all sit while you kind of go through, well, first there was tension between the North and the South over states' rights, and second there was, right, and so one way to make questioning more engaging would be to unbundle that question and parse it out to multiple people. Great, let's talk about the causes of the Civil War. How many primary causes have we discussed, Sarah? 3. Yes, that's right, there were 3 causes. So what was the most important cause of the Civil War, Stuart? Tension between the North and the South over states' rights, yes. And so what was another cause, Robert? Right, and so then Robert has to listen to your answer and build off of it and be attentive, and the questions are popping around from person to person, and so it's just more engaging from a group standpoint. But another thing I think is really important from a questioning standpoint, you described playing guess what teacher's thinking. I think a lot of times we think of problem solving as guessing what the solution is, but just as valid sometimes is guessing how to apply a solution. And so maybe I'll take an example from vocabulary instruction, which I think is hugely important in schools. But many teachers approach it like this. Let's say you come across a word in a text that you're reading a text for the students, and you come across a word that kids don't know, reprehensible. And so a teacher might say, who can tell me what reprehensible means? Maybe some kids know, maybe they don't, maybe they're guessing. Has anyone ever heard it before? When do you think you might have heard it? What might reprehensible mean? Right, so this is kind of a slow process. It's a little bit painful. It's people guessing about things that they don't know. And it's just not that intellectually productive. I mean, it can be productive in some situations, but just as productive and arguably more productive would be to actually give the students the solution. Reprehensible means terrible and worthy of scorn. Who is reprehensible in this chapter right now? Why are they reprehensible? Who else has been reprehensible in the course of the novel we're reading? Great. Can you think of a situation in your own life where someone was reprehensible? What would you do about it if you behaved reprehensibly to someone? Could a good person ever behave reprehensibly? Great. So I ask these series of questions that are less about guessing what the solution is, more about how do I problem solve to use the idea? And if you apply that to a sporting setting, you could think about lots of times we might stop a practice and say, great, what should we do in this situation? I don't know, coach, I can guess, but if I say we've been talking about switching the field to relieve pressure. We're under pressure. How can we switch the field here? How can we change the point of attack? Well, first of all, the center backs have to drop 5 steps to be more accessible to a ball around the back. Yes, and then the outside midfielder has to press wide to the touch line to create width, right? And what do you have to do with the ball? I have to have my eyes up and I have to reorient myself to face the direction of play. Yes. Now that we know those things, let's try it. Go. Right. So that's another form of problem solving through questioning, but it's a more applied version of it. It's less about the guess what the answer is and more like apply and use the answer. I think that can be generally very productive. Questioning can take a lot of time. I just think that when I do it, I want to make sure that I'm productive and practical and engaging and helping kids prepare to answer the questions that they face on the field of play.
I love that. I think people would take an awful lot from that, because I actually often get like this kind of, when I talk about questioning with coaches, they often, you start, what do we need to do here? And you always get, and all the coaches always say to me, the kids will always say, we need to communicate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So what does that mean?
Or even sometimes coaches will say, what aren't we doing? Well, we're not doing a lot of things. But that's when kids always say, communicating, we need to communicate.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
And then, people pat themselves on the back because they all got the right answer, but it doesn't mean anything, does it? So, well, tell me more. In what way? But actually, I really like that. Sort of say. So we've already said that we need to communicate better. So what is it about our communication that we need to do better in this? And then you're just narrowing down the conversation, aren't you?
Yeah, it also ensures that the conversation is focused on your lesson objective, which I think is really important. I just finished reading Anders Ericsson's book, Peak, which is fantastic and really great for coaches. And I think he summarizes a lot of his research on deliberate practice. And one of the things that I think I realize connects to what great classroom teachers is he says, you learn more when you're aware of what you're trying to learn. And so having a clear session objective is really important. So if I stop a session and I say, what didn't we do here? I could get any answer under the sun. It might be that we're not communicating. It might be that we're too compressed, and it might be that we're not hustling, right? Who knows what kids will say. But really, if I'm maximizing the value of my session, let's say my session is on communication, or my session is on switching the field of play, switching the point of attack, changing the field of play. Now I can say our session is on communicating. How do we need to apply what we've been talking about with communication here? What do we need to do differently to communicate? What are we doing well to communicate? And therefore, all of my stoppages and all my questioning can be around that intentional theme, that goal that accelerates learning. And so I just allow my problem solving to become more intentional when I direct it in that way.
Fascinating. On that subject, actually, and just talking about learning, I mentioned before we started recording that I'd been at a seminar today with a load of academics who were sharing some of their research in expertise and skill acquisition. Ericsson's work came up quite a bit, actually. One of the things that we talked about a lot was implicit learning and explicit learning. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering around, one of the things that was proposed, some research by two academics back actually in the 60s, Fitz and Posner, they talked about, methodologies for expertise. But then one of the things they talked about was how implicit learning, i.e., essentially there's no error. You're not creating a scenario where there is an error, as opposed to explicit learning where there is obviously an error and a correction, mm-hmm. and how an implicit learning approach can actually make somebody more robust when it comes to being under pressure. Mm-hmm. I just wonder whether I might be putting you on the spot here, but whether you've seen any evidence of that in a school context, teachers using implicit learning effectively, or anything in that world.
So implicit learning you would define as practicing getting it right, and explicit learning would be sort of exploring or exposing errors, or learning by making mistakes. Yeah, kind of.
There's parameters, say, mm-hmm. either learning by making mistakes or by a coach there being correcting the error, versus somebody essentially exploring methods to succeed without necessarily having any task constraints at all opposed to them. So golf, let's say golf putting, you're not even trying to get it in the hole. You're just hitting the putt in a certain direction and just getting the flow and the motion. And then you bring the hole in, and then there's an immediate corrective process that comes in. So
yeah. I'm not sure if I'm quite getting at what you're asking about here, but I do think that, people tend to valorize the idea of discovery learning, but I think that there are a couple things that research would point out about the idea of giving kids a problem and having them discover the solution. It sounds like a lovely romantic idea. It tends to be inefficient. You're not sure that they'll develop the best solution, and it also tends to have a disparate impact, which is the most prepared. That's a great tool for expert learners, for whom throwing them a problem when they have a lot of background knowledge and a lot of facility and a lot of skill to apply is challenging and engaging and useful. It's not as productive for novice learners who don't have the same set of problem-solving tools to apply to the problem, and therefore they're more likely to guess or arrive at a suboptimal solution and encode a suboptimal solution. So my gut would be that, it would be easy to over-extrapolate and say, well, I love doing this as an expert, an adult, and so this is how kids should learn it as well. Yeah. I'm a PhD in history, and I love being faced with this, or I'm a PhD in math, and I love being faced with these sorts of math problems, and so that would be the right thing to do with kids who are just learning math. And I'm not sure that research would bear out that that's the right approach.
Yeah, I'm with you. So in terms of, I guess with everything, it's probably, it's not an either or scenario. It's kind of you're probably blending and working in different domains to allow.
That's right.
Yeah, allow the creativity.
I think that what you said is really smart. I'm sorry to jump in, but I think that we tend to see things as either or, and I think usually when I hear a debate like that, I try and think about which one when, and if I'm a betting man, I want to hedge my bets and bet a little bit on both and think about when is each of those tools most useful to me, as opposed to which one has to be right and which one has to be wrong. And I'm struck by how many coaches I've come across lately. The French, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on a British podcast, but a lot of people in this country are talking about the French Football Federation's coach training program, and a lot of U.S. coaches have been going there and really happy with it. And I think one of the reasons why is that they don't talk about the methodology; they talk about methodologies, and then aligning the methodologies to what you're trying to teach. So if you're trying to teach a skill, you teach differently than if you're trying to teach decision making, right? So it's I think that's generally good health from a strategy and approach perspective.
I think that's important actually, because I've definitely been on this journey myself where, I probably started out really very much instructional, very didactic, very much, kind of do what I say, not what I do, what I say, not what I do. But then I went on that whole, oh no, this isn't the way, now it's all about questioning. Mm-hmm. So then I started, and then I became all about questioning, and I would never tell anybody anything.
Right.
And then I think as you then sort of mature and you develop your knowledge and an understanding of the right methodology for the right moment.
That's right.
Or based on what it is you're trying to achieve, then you understand that actually you slide in and around these things and become more sophisticated in your use of the different methods.
That's right. The more you question, the more sometimes it's a gift to tell people things that they need to know, and the more you tell people things that they need to know, the more it's a gift to ask them questions and let them. I think that things that we think of as opposite are often synergistic, and I think that's a great example.
I think that where there might be a difference, I'd be interested to get your views on this, is that because sports are often the actual experience that the individual has of not only cognitively processing what it is they need to, or the correct course of action in a given moment, but also the approach they have to do physically. There's a whole array of different, physical dimensions that they have to consider
right,
all at once. So I think there's a quite a large element of genuinely experiencing something, a scenario, over a period of time without necessarily being told, do this, do that. Because I do sometimes wonder whether, because we're quite solution orientated as coaches, we're often wanting to either correct or offer solutions. And sometimes that can potentially rob the individual of a valuable learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. So there might be a difference there, perhaps, between an educational context, which is largely cognitive in nature, and a physical context. I don't know if if there is a difference from your mind.
Well, I think maybe the even bigger difference, which is maybe caused by the physical context, is just the speed of decision making required.
Sure.
I don't know if you know Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. It's fascinating, and it's really changed the way that I think about cognition.
Yeah. But
his research, for which he won the Nobel Prizes, describes System 1 and System 2, and basically System 1 is instinctual and rushes to judge and is very fast. In fact, you're often not aware of what it's doing. Another great book is David Eagleman's Incognito, which is about the hidden workings of the brain, and he makes this fascinating point that awareness of your own cognition is beneficial only up to a limited degree, and that people are not aware of most of the thinking that they're doing at a given time, particularly when they have to be fast. Yeah. And so the slow system 2 that Kahneman describes, kind of programs System 1, but System 1, which has to act faster than you can think. The perfect analogy of this is it takes 0.6 of a second to have a conscious thought. Yeah. But in baseball, the American sport of baseball, it takes 0.4 of a second for a pitch to arrive at home plate. Yeah. And so you almost can't consciously decide to hit the bait. It has to be a routinized response, physical and mental together, and so it has to be encoded.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that encoding process is overseen by decision making. In other words, because if you want to act fast during the game, it often requires slow reflection and thinking during practice and problem solving, so that you understand what you're doing and encode. So slow thinking in practice often leads to fast thinking during the game. But I'd say the speed of required, in an academic setting, we want students to slow down and we want them to use System 2 and then we want them to problem solve. And really, in most sporting endeavors, there's very little time to problem solve. And so the problem solving has to happen in training, and much of it has to be encoded by the time the game arrives.
Yeah. Yeah, which is one of the reasons I'm quite passionate about what you might call sort of, game-based or constraint-led approaches, or what they call ecological dynamics, because I'm quite firmly of the belief that in order to be able to process these kinds of decisions at the speed you need you need an awful lot of exposure to them. Mm-hmm. And this concept of, repetition without repetition. So you're not literally just trying to encode a particular movement pattern. What you're trying to do is encode a movement pattern based on a set of parameters at any given time. So it might be minutely different at any moment, just depending on what that person does or what the weather's doing or whatever it might be. So I think that's quite a bit different as well.
I think it's true. I think one of the largest parts of cognition, which accounts for more than half of your brain cells, is perception. And people think of perception as a mechanical process, but it's actually not. Knowing where to look and when and how often are you're not aware that you're doing them, but they're parts of your problem solving. And so what a great athlete does is perceive the situation. There's a ton of research on this about the way that athletes or experts at anything perceive the situation better and faster and more completely than novices do. So like the classic piece of research on this is chess players. So if you show a group of expert chess players a chessboard for 5 seconds, they can remember something. A great chess player will be able to remember something like, if the chessboard is like from an actual game, they can remember something like 20 to 25 of the pieces on the board. Whereas a novice will be able to remember three or four of the pieces were. But if you switch that and you put the chess pieces in random patterns that are not related to the state of play, then the advantage evaporates, and neither group can remember more than where 3 or 4 of the pieces were. And what that suggests is that experts have learned to look and understand the patterns of play in the game, and they don't see a single piece. They see a rook threatening a bishop supported by and protected by 2 pawns, one to the left and one to the right, and that becomes a chunk of information. And I think a lot of the research says that's what athletes are doing. They're learning to see while they play. And so the phrase you use that I look, ecological dynamics, the more I can be exposed to the patterns of play, the shapes of play, as I'm playing, the more I learn to perceive quickly and to make decisions based on that.
Yeah. Listen, I could get into the weeds with this, but I'm just conscious that I've got limited time with you. So
I'm sorry. I've boosted the nerd factor here too. I apologize for that.
I'm right there with you. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about really was I'm really interested in, from a talent development perspective, environments, and it's kind of linked to what we've just been talking about, environment design. And you've, I think, been at the forefront of trying to create an optimal environment for young people to thrive within.
Yeah.
And obviously, in your context, you're taking, children with quite complex challenges, and obviously through excellent teaching, helping them to, I guess, overachieve based on what would be expected of them. Right. But are there any other factors that within Uncommon Schools that you think are important for talent development landscape?
Yeah, definitely. Two things I'd point out. The first one is culture, which is any organization is first and foremost a culture, a classroom, a school, etc. And so part of what it does is it shapes the way that its participants, the members of the culture, see the world. And that's one of the first and most urgent tasks for any organization that seeks to have people outstrip expected achievement, either society's achievement of them or their own achievement of themselves, which is to change the way they perceive their relationship to the organization and to the task of learning. And so every interaction in our schools is about, from the minute you walk into one of our schools, our goal is like, we never want you to see your the normalcy of peers behaving non-productively or negatively. Right, as soon as that becomes normal, then you start to think, well, I want to be normal. What should I do? I should behave non-productively. What we want you to see is the best of your peers and your peers and your teachers, bringing, striving to be the best, wanting to be excellent, being people of high character. And so engineering the culture is really critical. So teaching is a strange combination of the sublime and the mundane, right? There's so many, questioning is so critically important, and you could spend your life studying it, but so is, those mundane cultural moments of, how students influence each other with their behavior in the classroom. So I think culture is critical. And the second thing I'd add is that culture is critical among the adults as well. That, I really like Carol Dweck's research on mindset and growth mindset. I think it's powerful. And I think it's powerful to most educators instantly see the value of it. And it's obvious to them that growth mindset applies to children. But it's not as obvious to them that growth mindset applies to adults. And I think it was a really fascinating white paper written by an organization called TNTP in this country this year. And they studied professional development in 3 large school districts in the United States. And what they found were a couple of fascinating things. They found that the average school spent $18,000 per person per year on professional development, which is fascinating because if you didn't spend that money, you could boost the average teacher's salary by 20%. And they found that 1 in 10 teachers improved in any measurable way in a typical year from that investment. In other words, it's a disaster. But then they studied this other organization, interestingly, and what they found is that for a slightly smaller investment, 7 out of 10 teachers improved in any given year. The content of the professional development was not that different. What was different was the culture around the content. That people walked into the meeting, the adults walked into the professional development training sessions thinking, it's our job to get better. I want to get better. After I walk out of here, my colleagues are going to ask me about how I'm going to try and use this idea, and we're going to watch each other, and we're going to talk about it in the staff lounge. And they will expect me to try and be great because it supports them in being great. And so this is really an example of growth mindset among the adults, the loving the process of constant improvement. And it's really, in the end, the driver of student achievement as much as anything else.
Wow.
Here's just a story about that from a school that I visited. So lots of times when you go to a school and you ask a teacher, can I come visit your class? Or let's say you work in a school and you say, can I come visit your class? Or can I come visit your training session today? A teacher might say, don't come today. I'm doing something new. It's going to be bad. Which is a way of saying, don't come see me struggle. Don't come acknowledge with me that this is an incredibly difficult job. Just come see me when it goes well. So it's fascinating, right? So I went to the school recently and I saw a teacher that I know walking down the hall, and I said, hey, Jamie, how you doing? And she said, I can't talk now. I said, oh, sorry. And she said, I just taught the worst lesson and I have to go tell Katie about it. And I thought, well, this is really fascinating. One, that she acknowledged to me, like her first thought was, I taught a terrible lesson, but that was normal. B, that she wanted to go tell someone on the staff about it, and the assumption that they would make it better. Like, that she wanted to expose her own struggle with relative comfort. And the most fascinating part was that Katie was her boss. She was the principal of the school.
Wow.
And so her perception in that moment was that, the school, that my boss will think more of me if I expose the struggles. I mean, it's a testament to Katie's leadership, right? I want her to know about what's hard about the job so that she can help me get better, as opposed to I'm so glad Katie didn't see me flail on that lesson, which is what I think happens in most organizations, in most schools.
Yeah,
people are trying to hide from the reality of how hard the work is.
That's so. God, there's so much in that. I found this something similar in the world of coaching, though, where so I don't know if you know, but so I don't just write blogs and do podcasts about talent. My actual day job is I'm the head of coaching for Sports England. So Sports England is kind of like the national agency that distributes funding to sports organisations in England, and we've never had a coaching plan before, so I've just written the coaching plan for England. And one of the big things that I've tried to readdress within that piece of work is an emphasis on coach learning post qualification and support for coaches at the point of delivery. So I firmly believe that people do these educational things and they go on, so-called professional development activity, but it's all based on input. So information input, and the assumption is, I'll go on a workshop, I'll get a load of information, I'm going to do all of that I've learned, and I'm going to apply it. And it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, I emphatically agree, and I think this is maybe this comes back to what I think drives a successful organization, sporting endeavor or academically, which is professional development. I think has to be embedded in the life of the school. And this is hard for me because people call me all the time and they say, "Will you come to a workshop at my school?" And I try and discipline myself to say no, because all the research is really clear that drive-by training won't work. So if I send, conferences are great, but if I send a coach or two from my club to a conference and they come back, a couple things haven't happened. What needs to happen for the knowledge in that conference to change behavior and improve actions in the club? Well, one of the most important things is shared vocabulary, which is everyone in the club knows the concepts and can talk about it. There's nothing worse than going by yourself to a conference and then coming back to an organization of people who you can't talk to about it. You have to try and describe what it was. Yeah. The learning that happens after the training session ideally should be much larger than the learning that happens in the training session if you've given people a shared vocabulary to say, my lesson today, I realized I could have used cold call. Do you use cold call? Yeah, here's how I think about cold call. Oh, wait, so you smile when you cold call. That's so interesting. I'm going to try that. And then I try it and I come back to you. I was trying that cold call idea that you talked about. Right. That's all enabled by a shared vocabulary to be able to talk about things. And you only really get that when everyone is in the room for training. But also, I think improving adults works best when it's embedded in the fabric of observation and supervision and support and accountability, right? You say to someone, I'm going to come, why don't I drop by your session today and watch you? Why don't you try a cold call and see how it goes, and I'll watch you and then I'll give you some feedback. Or why don't you go watch Stuart today? He see how he uses cold call and then choose 2 ideas that you like and try them yourself, and then I'll check in with it in a couple weeks and see how it's going. And if you're reluctant to try it, then I say, really to be successful here, I really need to see you try this. I know it's scary, but I want you to do it in the next couple sessions and let me know when you're ready and I'll come see you. But that's really how change happens, is when the learning is embedded in the fabric of the organization, and which I think is kind of what you're getting at, which is so important. But sending people out to conferences generally is not going to change organizational behavior.
No, and I think that the bit that a lot of what we're trying to do now with our strategy, I suppose, is we've kind of moved away from what you might call your traditional sport for sport's sake model, where working with the traditional sporting content, and now we're moving much more towards helping people become more physically active, tackling obesity and tackling inactivity. And in order to help people to overcome inactivity, I mean, that's a significant, there's a lot of people there with some fairly deep ingrained reasons why they're very inactive. So overcoming that's quite a difficult thing. Part of it is about
the unlearning is as important as the learning.
For sure, yeah. And part of it's about creating a great experience, but it's also about helping people to, I guess, go on a behavioural change journey. But I think the people who are at the coalface of that, they need real support. And of course, they're not going to get anybody there. And I never had in my journey, literally 15 years, I call it the wilderness years, where anybody came along and said, and just watched me coach. And then afterwards we had a conversation about it. And I describe it as, in fact, I don't describe it. A friend of mine, Andrew Gillett, who's a coach developer, describes it as it's helping people make sense of what's happening to them.
Yeah. It's so true. And sadly, usually your reward for competence is to be ignored by the organization. We know that when people are learning or when they're struggling, like someone then sometimes walks by, but a typical, head of school walks down the hallway, pokes their head in your classroom, sees that it's not on fire and keeps going. Yeah. Whereas ironically, if you're a good teacher, you're the person who most deserves and warrants and needs the feedback.
Yeah.
Because moving from good to great is what makes organizations great. Having great people is what drives results in organizations. And good people, when they start to stagnate in their work, they leave. They find something else to do. And we have a huge teacher shortage in this country. And people talk about attracting teachers, but to me, a much bigger issue is retaining them. If you don't create a constant fascination with the work and interest in the work, you won't get a learning curve from people who've been at it for a long time. And when they get bored, they're at risk to leave.
And if you can foster that kind of learning culture where, like you say, it becomes a fascination, it becomes absorbing. I had a coach, Kendall McQuaid, he's a golf coach on previous episode, and he says that when he coaches, it's actually a pretty selfish act because he goes into flow. He says he's in the moment. He loves it every second of it. And I don't think there's been any research done into coaches in flow, but he says he gets totally absorbed in the experience. And I think and there must be educators out there who go into a similar scenario. And if you can get them absorbed in their activity, and actually what helps them to do that is to drawing their awareness to particular things that they're doing, then it becomes almost like an addictive quality that people just can't get enough of.
That's fascinating. And it's one of the things I'm hearing and what you're saying is it comes back to perception, which is when you make people able to perceive more of like things that matter and what's happening around them as it becomes more interesting to them, and they start, it becomes more engaging to them.
Absolutely. And like you say, those conversations that you have with people who are helping you make sense of things. I mean, the example you gave earlier on about, I just taught the worst lesson. The reality probably was there were
probably
2 or 3 things in it that could have been better. Yeah.
It probably wasn't that bad. Or if it was, I mean, one of my favorite books about organizational change is Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch. And they make they make this great point that we always presume that the size of the solution has to match the size of the problem. But classrooms are a case study in the fact that sometimes a very simple change can cascade through the fabric of the classroom and have immense change throughout the entire room. That a very small change might have saved that lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, look, I know I could talk to you for an awful long time, and I know you're probably coming up on time in terms of the next thing you've got to go and do. But I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and have a conversation. And if you do have some time in the future, I mean, you'd always be welcome to come back on, because I'm sure people would be fascinated to listen to more you've got to say.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. And let's do it again soon.
Super. Thank you very much, Doug, and have a great day.
Thanks, Stuart. You too.